Good morning. In spring of 2015, an ad hoc committee called the Church Growth Task Group met for the first time to map out the tasks we had been given by the steering committee of our congregation. The primary task for us was to design a forum for the congregation to consider and respond intentionally to church growth. Hope was outgrowing its staffing component, that was me at halftime. We were beginning to outgrow the space we share with Young United at Crossways. And most importantly, our growth was pushing at some of our self-identity as a small alternative church group. So what does the church do when it has a situation? We form a committee. Very early on in this process, the Church Growth Task Group decided it was important to hear the stories we tell each other about who we are. So we invited the congregation to gather on a Saturday morning in October 2015 to put themselves on the church timeline and to indicate what they thought of as significant events in the life of the church. So we taped a long sheet of paper along the gym wall, wrote 1988 at one end and 2015 on the other, and invited people to write. Perhaps when they started coming to Hope and why. Maybe key events in the life of the church, however it is that they were defined. Key events in their own lives and how they might have impacted the life of the church. When they weren't writing, they were invited around tables to tell each other stories about their relationship with our church, what brought them, what keeps them, or whatever else it is they might want to say. So here on the left are some founding members of Hope, obviously trying to figure out amongst themselves, when was it we decided to, before writing things down? They are writing about the late 1980s as the church was beginning. During those first years, there was a lot of transition. People would come and go as life situations changed, as people came and went from Winnipeg, came and went from church, or whatever reason participated at Hope for a year or two, but then left. The church stayed fairly stable in terms of numbers, between 30 and 50 people, but who was there changed, with lots of coming and going. Families often left the church when their children became the age where they wanted programs for them, like Sunday school or youth, and there just wasn't enough of a critical mass. There were no paid staff during those early years, as the church was set up to be lay-led. So the workload, visitation, pastoral care, preaching, leading children's programs, etc., was shared among this ever-changing group. Here's the second wave, a small but stable group of people that came and stayed in the late 90s and early 2000s. In 2000, Hope made the controversial and drastic move away from sole lay leadership model and hired their first pastor at a 0.4 FTE. This provided some stability, I think, but still left significant opportunity for lay involvement in key positions, while relieving the congregation of trying to do it all. There were still some challenges, and what you can't really see from where you're sitting in the bottom left corner, it says 2003 to 2004, the day that Sunday school died. This was written by a group of now young adults who were at the tail end of what had been a larger group of youth. But as that group aged out of programs, there were 3 school-aged children left behind, and Sunday school died. Now, after everyone had done their writing and people finished telling their stories in table groups, the facilitator looked over what we had written and tried to note patterns. Some things here at the bottom, like bad words that were part of the early church of our early church, rejecting the traditional language of much of that we thought of as being bad in other Mennonite churches. I think they thought that if they changed the language, somehow the form itself would change, which happened, I think, to some degree in early days. But that waned as time went on, and they are able to laugh now about the fact that for years they talked about input rather than sermons. The facilitator also noted some of the things about the vision of Hope in its early days. A strong desire that all could share their gifts and leadership, that we could be an alternative Mennonite church in the Winnipeg setting. And then there was this. Nothing happened at Hope Mennonite Church between 1993 and 1997. The facilitator made note of it by making a big circle there, but didn't follow up. The Church Growth Task Group ended its work in spring 2016 with a recommendation to hire an associate pastor, with the 2 part-time pastors now working the equivalent of 1.0 FTE. However, those of us in leadership knew that this was just solving one aspect of the challenges of growth, and that there were going to be other issues that would come up if we continued to grow. And we continued to grow. So less than a year after our new associate pastor started, we formed a new committee to address those issues, which we called the Visioning Committee. And we took the timeline out again. First, as a committee, to look over it and to use it to guide our thinking. Then, in December 2017, we invited the whole congregation to engage with it again. We added some paper at the end and invited people who were new to write themselves in. We invited others to add what was missing. And this time, the facilitator made note of the empty space between 1993 and 1997, and from the back of the sanctuary came the words, "Those were the years we were exhausted." I have heard certain hints of that exhaustion over my time at Hope. And I know that there have been debates about whether the church should or could survive, and various efforts at restructuring with the attempt to make things easier, though often they just ended up being harder. I know some people left because of burnout, and others stayed but never really fully recovered. I know key people kept the church afloat, and that our sister congregation at Crossways Young United should get at least some credit for keeping Hope Mennonite somewhat stable. The story of exhaustion belongs to only about 20 to 25% of our current adult population. But I wonder if its resonance is much stronger as we look to the future and make decisions together. I think it has had some positive impact as people celebrate that we're able to achieve together as a larger body and all the resources we are now able to provide our children. I also think there's some risk aversion that underlies much of our decision making. The Visioning Committee continues its work of inviting Hope Mennonite to look to the future with gratitude, with excitement and creativity, even as we work at redefining ourselves as a mid-sized congregation and responding to those who come to our doors. I'm grateful to the openness that people have shown to engaging with us. Thank you.